Further breaking news coming in. Lankan Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe calls for urgent meeting as protesters in Sri Lanka's Colombo broke through police barricades and stormed the president's official residence in one of the largest anti-government marches in the crisis-hit country this year. And protests really spiraling out of control in Sri Lanka. Protesters broke through barricades and barged into President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's residence. And now we are learning that the president has in fact fled. And amidst all the turmoil, the Prime Minister Wickremesinghe has called for a meeting. And we are being joined by Dr. Narayan Lakshman, Associate Editor of The Hindu. Thank you, sir, for joining us on the broadcast. Sir, how are you viewing these political developments in Sri Lanka?
So, as you've observed in your report, it is an extreme crisis in the sense it has been mounting steadily over the many months, but at this time it's reached breaking point because obviously there is a sense among the public of Sri Lanka that a political solution is not emerging quickly enough. Meanwhile, of course, everything from basic food grains to fuel is completely out of supply. People are struggling, and therefore you're seeing this venting of public anger. And I think it's inevitable that President Rajapaksa has actually had to flee. And, there's going to be further turmoil before this starts getting better. That's our sense of what's happening on the ground today.
Right. Dr. Lakshman, if you could also, reflect on, as far as India-Sri Lanka is concerned, and do you think the help that we as a country has provided to Sri Lanka is enough?
Well, there's two sides to that question. I mean, one is that, of course, we do provide aid to a number of our neighboring countries. Sri Lanka has been a long time sort of regional ally of ours, and there was the involvement even before the LTTE days and during and after. And I think this time India has provided aid along with China, but there is the second side of it, which is that that there's that rivalry between India and China, and Sri Lanka has so far been on the fence. As we know, the Rajapaksa regime earlier under Mahinda Rajapaksa was quite pro-Sri Lanka in its leaning. And there is a sense that they could have done more to, engage with India, whether it's in terms of aid or economic cooperation. But at this point of crisis, I think there is definitely more for India to do. India has, of course, stepped up in a major way of supplying basic goods and commodities to the people of Sri Lanka, but also we understand has had conversations about larger, longer-term projects, lending, which will help the economy crawl back to some sense of normalcy over the coming years.
Right, right. Dr. Lakshman, who do you think should be the next contender if those resignations really come in of the president?
Look, that's a tricky one because obviously the government has tried to project a sense of breaking with the past by Wickremesinghe, the Prime Minister, coming in, stepping in. But the fact is that the Rajapaksa clan as such owns an enormous number of the national assets of the country. As we saw, there was a very large number of them who were already in the cabinet and in different roles in government, and they all had to resign. So breaking that grip is going to take a while. And meanwhile, the mantle firmly falls to Ranil Wickremesinghe to steer the country through the crisis. As you know, they're in conversations with even USAID for major tens of millions of dollars programs of lending. And I think a candidate is going to have to evolve, has no links to the Rajapaksa whatsoever, because that is the sense of public anger against the entire political connections of that family and what they're seen as being responsible for allowing this crisis to happen.
Right. Dr. Lakshman, when we're talking about the Rajapaksa clan, where do you think they could have done things better in terms of their policies?
Look, they came to power strongly on the back of the 2009 defeat of the LTTE, and there was a wave of sort of ultra-nationalism that accompanied that. And at the time, President Mahinda Rajapaksa certainly rode that wave to power and was extremely popular and populist in his outlook. However, since peace has descended upon Sri Lanka, there was a mistake, in a sense, strategically made in not using peacetime to then build up domestic industries, to build up trading ports, to build up further infrastructure for economic development, which would have made Sri Lanka sui generis, generate income from within its own economy. Instead, it continued to be reliant on aid, on a certain extent of economic trade, but it did not have its own industries developed. That was a big error, and because it was partly driven by this ethno-chauvinism, this kind of focus on the Sinhala pride issues, things like that. And I think that's where the mistake happened. Instead of really putting the war behind them and focusing on what is needed as an economic development strategy, they continued to beat the drums on Sinhala nationalism. I think this will therefore take a long time to correct. It's not an overnight solution. Firstly, you have to stabilize the economy macroeconomically, and you will have to lean towards the US or the Middle East or other lenders, including the IMF, multilateral, who could help you do that. And then from there, you have to once again try and build up your industries.
Right, Dr. Lakshman, thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast and sharing your views.